Recession, spending cuts, economic unrest, and government bailouts. Over the past few years, they've shaken some of the biggest economies in Western Europe and North America, and the ripples are being felt around the world. So as Western nations fight to restore economic stability, we ask, is neoliberal economics failing? For decades, the United States led the world in practicing and promoting private enterprise, deregulation, and global commerce. Decades of Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union bolstered Western belief in the power of the market and the role of private corporations. American economist Milton Friedman and former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher were among those who believed an unfettered economic system was the only way to create stable, secure societies. In fact, Margaret Thatcher's slogan for this was the acronym TINA, which means there is no alternative. But a mortgage crisis in the U.S. in 2008 dragged much of the world into recession. Critics say it blew the lid off a corrupt capitalist system where American financial institutions were blamed for bending the rules and manipulating the system for profit. 4 years later, the U.S. is still struggling, and Europe is being buffeted by a wave of national fiscal emergencies and banking problems. Joining me now to discuss this is economist Jeremy Rifkin, who has advised the European Union on the economy, climate change, and energy security for the past decade. He's also a prolific writer and the author of the latest book, which is called The Third Industrial Revolution: How Lateral Power is Transforming Energy, the Economy, and the World. We want to welcome you to the show. Thanks so much for coming in.
Nice to be here.
Is it time to recalibrate how we're doing things as far as, this neoliberal economic thinking?
Well, we definitely are in real trouble. We have a global economic crisis. The second industrial revolution, based on fossil fuels and nuclear power, it's dying. Those energies are getting more expensive. They're never going to get cheaper. And the technologies based on those energies, like the internal combustion engine, centralized electricity, they're old. They have no multiplier effect. And this whole civilization is made out of carbon, so all of our construction materials are more expensive to maintain. So, and then compounded, we now have real-time climate change, which is impacting agriculture and infrastructure. So we obviously are in a crisis, and we need a new economic vision and game plan for the world.
Well, let's get back to neoliberalism, though. Is it just, it's over? I mean, that whole way of thinking, we just have to rethink things?
We have to rethink it. I'm a real fan of the market social model. You have to have both. I believe the market's helpful because it can spawn entrepreneurial interest and risk-taking, but it also has to be checked with a social model. Because if the market's left by itself, it can run wild. And you get to a point where you have a winner-take-all scenario. A handful of the rich get richer, everyone else gets poor and marginalized out.
And clearly that's what we saw here in the United States. And we saw investment not so much in value. I have a friend who says they invested in vapor, these derivatives, and it's just moving money all around and people making money not really on value or anything, and then all of a sudden it collapses. The
reason it collapsed, in the Third Industrial Revolution, Chapter 1 in that book really goes into this in detail. What happened is our second industrial revolution took off with the interstate highways, biggest public works project in history. That interstate highway system in the 50s, 60s, and 70s allowed us to build suburban communities, a lot of construction business. And then we were able to put in the shopping malls and create a mass consumer society, all of that because of the interstate highways. And that peaked in the late 80s. We overbuilt, and we went into a great recession in the late 80s because we overbuilt our housing. And then to come out of that recession, we didn't have a new economic revolution in place. The internet was boutique. So what we did is we started to live off the savings of the second industrial revolution, and we've been doing it for 20 years.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your revolution, but first let me talk about regulation, because there's a lot of people who say that the regulation wasn't in place, and that's why things collapsed. Do you think that's true, and does there need to be more regulation?
Well, I think that there needs to be a balance between incentivizing the market and making sure there are checks and balances in place so the market doesn't run to the extreme. That's why you need a social market model, and I think Europe provides a little bit of a better frame of reference for that. We have to make sure that government is there and civil society is there to ensure that the fruits of new economic opportunity are widely distributed so that you have a more equitable and just society. If not, it can end up like the U.S. We were the most middle-class society in the world in 1960. Today, we're 29 out of 31 OECD countries in income disparity. Only Turkey and Mexico have greater disparity in income. that's not a good test of a country's ability in the long run.
Well, and a poison gets into the system and it manifests itself. Europe also impacted by what happened here in the United States, correct? I mean,
absolutely.
And so how do you rectify that? I mean, if the United States is having issues and it just trickles across into Europe, how do you protect yourself against that?
Well, clearly the problem here is there's a global problem, and that is the second industrial revolution based on fossil fuels and the technologies that go with it are sunsetting. Let me share an anecdote. When Chancellor Merkel became chancellor, she asked me to come to Berlin in the first few weeks of her government to help her address the question, how do you grow the German economy? The first question I asked the chancellor, how do you grow the German economy, the European economy, or the global economy in the sunset, the last stages of a great energy era, and a whole industrial infrastructure built on it? That's a global issue. So what we need now is we need a new economic vision and a game plan to go with it to move us to a third industrial revolution, to create the jobs, the new opportunities, the new businesses for the 21st century.
And you believe strongly that's clean energy, it's green energy, and yet well, you understand that if people invest, they want a return on their investment. And yet, when you look across the globe, I mean, we're seeing in Germany, it was Q-Cells, Evasol, Solyndra here in the United States, all of these companies who invested in green technology, all of them going bankrupt. So is it just too early? What's the problem?
No, it's not understanding how you lay out a third industrial revolution infrastructure. President Obama's mistake, for example, he spent billions of dollars of U.S. tax money, stimulus money. But he did it on standalone projects, a solar factory in one state, a battery factory in another state, unconnected. What we need to realize is that the great economic revolutions in history occur when two things happen. First, new energy regimes emerge. But then those new energy regimes require new communication revolutions to manage them and coordinate their activity. So when communication revolutions converge with energy revolutions, we have the big shifts in history. That's going on right now. Right now, we're beginning to see in the last 24 months a new convergence of communication and energy. It's starting in Europe, especially in Germany, but watch China. Watch China. The internet, of course, is a powerful communication revolution. And what's interesting about the internet is it's distributed and collaborative, and it scales to lateral power. This internet communication revolution is now merging with a new energy regime, distributed energies, which are organized collaboratively and scale laterally. The sun, the wind, the heat under the ground, the ocean tides and waves, rural agricultural waste, they're everywhere. The question is, how do you collect them and create a new economic infrastructure?
But let me stop you there. The wind blows when it feels like blowing. The sun's only out a certain amount of time. The clouds come up. It's not predictable. It's difficult to harness. I know if I've got a coal power plant, all I have to do is throw a little bit more coal on. The plant continues to work. When do we get to the stage, because this sounds terrific to all environmentalists, but it's an idea and execution, those are two different things.
Well, let me say, it's an execution in Germany. If people want to know, is this just an idea? Germany's moving on this whole infrastructure. Let me lay it out, especially the storage part. The EU is committed formally to a five-pillar third industrial revolution. Pillar one, shift to 20% renewable energies by 2020, a third of electricity green. Pillar two, how do you collect energy that's everywhere? The sun, the wind, buildings. We have 191 million buildings in the European Union. The goal is to convert every existing building to your own personal power plant. So you can collect solar off the roof, wind off the walls, heat under the ground. And the analogy here is this. 1970, a few mainframe computers. Then this kid Steve Jobs comes along. He invents the personal computer. Now, 2.3 billion people create their own information. Today, we have a few power and utility companies, but already in Europe, several million buildings are generating their own energy. And in 10 years from now, tens of millions of buildings all over the world are going to generate their own green energy. And in 25 years from now, hundreds of millions of buildings, China, around the world, will collect energy on site. And just like we collect our own information, we're going to collect our own energy. Pillar three is the one you talked about, storage. You're right. The sun isn't always shining. The wind's blowing at night. You need the electricity during the day, so we have to store it. We're going to use hydrogen and all sorts of other storage technologies to store these energies so they're reliable. Pillar four is where the internet converges with the new energies. We use off-the-shelf internet technology and take the electricity and power grid of China, Europe, and the world. We transform it to an energy internet. So when millions of buildings are collecting green energy on site, storing it in hydrogen, like you and I store media and digital, then if you don't need some of that electricity, your software can connect you so you share that electricity across an entire continent on an energy internet. And pillar five, plug it into your electric vehicles, your fuel cell vehicles, your transport, and the infrastructure. That whole 5 pillars is the economic paradigm.
Again, it sounds great on paper, and yet you talk about the sunsetting, and if there was one place where nuclear would certainly be shunned, it would be Japan, and the OE plant just went back online.
It did, but the rest of Japan is pretty hostile to it coming back on.
But I think, doesn't it indicate that we aren't at this stage? I mean, it's going to take a long time to implement what you're talking about.
Let me say this. Pillar 1, Germany is at 20% green electricity last year and heading to 35%, everybody listening, by 2020. Pillar 2, Germany has converted 1 million buildings to personal power plants in 7 years and created 370,000 net jobs. Pillar 3, they're testing the energy internet now in 6 regions of Germany. That's Pillar 3 and 4. Pillar 5, Daimler and the other car companies are coming out with their fuel cell vehicles in mass production in 2014 to plug in the infrastructure. So when people say it isn't working, at least in the most robust industrial economy per capita in the world, Germany, they're moving ahead.
We're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much. Very interesting conversation. Appreciate you stopping by.